Yeah. This model. I get it with my. Yeah. Yeah. Burns from this. Okay. Should be good to go. Perfect. And here's the clicker if you need it. Forward. Thanks again, everyone. I just want to take an opportunity. We'll get started to introduce Jacob Sesker, and Jacob's going to go over the Mid Coast Arts and Culture Inventory today. So thanks, Jacob.
All right, pleasure to be here today. I see a few familiar faces. I'm going to talk with you briefly about a project that I'm doing with the Mid Coast Council of Governments that I think is really fun and exciting. About the creative economy of the Mid Coast. This is part of trying to figure out how to provide a toolkit to the communities in this region to help implement the SEDS plan and to help the communities in the region to implement their own goals with respect to the creative economy of the region. Obviously, there are a lot of assets, and we'll talk through those in a few minutes. It's personally meaningful for me. I'm a consultant who is based here in Brunswick, an economic developer. Also used to play electric violin in bands, and had a whole family full of artists. So, I love this sort of stuff. If you feel like you need to cut me off later, then, tell me to shut up. So what we're really trying to do is get a better understanding of the issues and needs facing the arts and culture businesses and institutions around the region. As we'll get to in a few minutes, there are obviously some really incredible ones and a huge concentration of them here in this region. It's a huge part of our quality of life here, as well as a big part of the quality of place of the communities that you all serve and represent. It's critically important for us to be able to sort of get a handle on how to maximize the economic power of this, how to, tell the story of the Mid-Coast region. What is the story that we want to share? How much do we want visitors here? And what type of visitors do we want to have here? And how are we going to leverage the assets that we've got to tell a story that we're comfortable with to get the outcomes that we're looking for? And a big part of this also is really supporting the communities of the Mid-Coast by providing research and solutions that are going to help you guys to implement the things that you've already identified as arts and culture related goals in your comprehensive plans, right? So one of the things that we're doing is looking at the implementation matrices and the comprehensive plans and trying to figure out what are the action items here in this community. We're using interviews to try to help us identify the strengths and weaknesses in the ecosystem. So we've begun talking to some people who are at some of the sort of like larger anchor institutions, as well as people at in other roles in the arts and culture economy in the region. We're talking to folks about regional marketing, which is obviously sort of a big priority insofar as the communities of the region want to leverage the arts and culture that are here to drive tourism, whether it's day visits or overnight visits. And also try to build some consensus on how the problems that need to be addressed will help us build regional partnerships and compete for grant funding going forward. There's a limited amount of funding to do projects of the sort of like, building significant momentum on long-term implementation of something like a significant cluster here in the region. And part of that requires that there's agreement about where we're going and what it is we're trying to achieve when we get there. What we're trying to do in this first stage of the project is to build enough sort of consensus among people, both in the stakeholder group in the arts and culture creative economy, and also at the community level, so that we'll be able to compete for grant funds to do some of the little things, hit the singles that we need to hit in order to really get the ball rolling going forward. We're building some maps and calendars, thinking about maybe social media campaigns, if we can figure out ways to fund those things going forward. But right now, really focusing on building maps at this point. I think that the calendars will be really helpful moving forward, just because of the sort of disconnect in the number of communities that we've got in the region. About, I think there are 63 of you guys, is that right? 69. 69? Okay. So as I said, we're assembling a list of all the relevant action items from the comprehensive plans. We're going to essentially try to take those action items and group them into buckets, and then we're going to figure out whether or not there are common solutions or best practices that apply to the things that are in those individual buckets to give you guys a toolkit to help achieve your objectives. And, again, the goal is really just to meet you guys where you are, provide examples of what can be done and info about how to do it, not to tell anybody what they should be doing. So at this stage, we're continuing to build out a data inventory, including the geolocation of arts and culture institutions and businesses. Right now, we've got latitudes and longitudes for all the businesses that we're aware of. We're reaching out to people in some communities at the chamber level and trying to figure out whether we've missed some that they can provide information for us about. We've got a pretty extensive set of economic data about the industries that we've identified as creative industries here, and I'll get into that data relatively in just a couple of minutes. We're interviewing the arts and culture institutions in the region, doing the mapping, and creating sort of an asset map for the creative economy here. And, we're going to be doing sort of a larger stakeholder convening in the fall, where we bring together folks from the creative economy somewhere at a location yet to be determined to have sort of a more in-depth group discussion about the things that we've been talking to folks about on an individual basis throughout the interview process. So just looking at the sort of like direct impact of the creative economy here in this region, using the 4-county area and excluding Brunswick here. So we're just talking about Sagadahoc, Lincoln, Knox, Waldo County as a proxy, because most of the economic data is reported out at the county level, obviously. We've got about $170 million in annual private sector revenue, about $24 million in wages to workers, 1,800 direct jobs. And each of these direct jobs in the arts, recreation, entertainment sector generates about 0.2 jobs in other industries. So if we were to apply that to the 1,800, and again, this is not looking at sort of far downstream effects of things like the impact of household spending households, but really just more like the secondary effects of, spending money with suppliers and things like that. We're talking about well over 2,000 jobs here. Just to give you a sense of sort of how that compares to the rest of the state, we can see here it's about 1.6% of the total economy of the Mid-Coast region. And for the rest of the state, it's about 1.1%. So this is about, again, 50% again larger than the creative economy in the rest of the state. Slightly different ways of showing that same information. We're at about, the Mid-Coast is roughly 1/10 of the state economy. You can see that we've got about 1/9 of the state's population, about 1/10 of the jobs, and more than 1/8 of the, with respect to the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector of the economy alone, that's more than 1/8 of the state of Maine's arts, entertainment, and recreation economy. So again, just sort of another way of saying, this is a bigger deal here than it is everywhere else. And I think this sort of illustrates that best of all, right? If we drill down and look at some specific things like museums, historic sites, and performers and creative artists, we can see that the Mid-Coast region has somewhere between, 1/6 and 1/3 almost, or well over a quarter, by some measures of what exists overall statewide in the economy. So, 25% of the museums in the state are in the Mid-Coast. 30% of the historic sites in the state are in the Mid-Coast, and about 20% of the performers and creative artists. So why do people come to the Mid-Coast? So part of this obviously is about the relationship between the creative economy and the visitor economy. And so, one of the things that we've done is look at the data that's reported by MOT, based on their intercept surveys of people who come to the state, and they do a fairly robust process in terms of the amount of surveying that they're doing, the amount of data that they collect. But a couple things I just wanted to highlight here. People who come to the Mid-Coast, more so than people who come to the state of Maine generally, come to shop for antiques, shop for local arts and crafts. They visit art museums and local artisan studios at a much higher rate than visitors to the rest of the state of Maine. And they attend popular music concerts and events at a much higher rate than visitors to the rest of the state of Maine do. So, these are obviously things that people are coming here to do. And that's important information for us to have. However, as we start to dig into some of the numbers here on the visitor economy, we can see some signs of weakness. While restaurants, just generally in shopping, the amount of money that is being spent by visitors is going up pretty significantly. Those are, relatively speaking, less dependent on volume and more dependent on just dollars, right? So you might have few people spending lots of dollars, and that makes up for it. And some of the other categories, that's not really the case. So accommodations, you can see, and this includes both hotel rooms and Airbnbs, has been flat for the last few years. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And you can see there are some other categories like transportation and groceries where people are spending significantly less. So obviously, some areas that are positive in terms of, restaurant spending and just sort of Main Street shopping. And then some other areas where the data would indicate that the region isn't necessarily keeping up or continuing to capture the same share of overall spending in the state of Maine as it had been previously. So just real quickly, I'm going to, point out here, this is room nights. 2023 was a great year for room nights in the Maine's Mid-Coast and Islands. Probably some of that was vacations people deferred during the pandemic that suddenly became a lot easier. But part of the question is this signal or is this noise, right? Was 2023 a great year and 2024 is just sort of a return to normal, or is 2024 sort of, marking a beginning of potentially a softening there? And here we can see something similar just in terms of visitor days in the region, a pretty big drop off from 23 to 24. Of about 10%, and you can see that that's significantly larger than the drop off in visitor days for Maine, excluding the Mid-Coast, which dropped by about 6.8%. Room night, yeah.
On the total room nights, does that include campgrounds?
I'm not sure. It's MOT data, and so they'd have to speak to that, but I'm not sure. Certainly, it includes Airbnbs. So here we can see 2023 to 2024 in terms of room nights, Mid-Coast and Islands dropped almost 12%, while the rest of Maine gained 3%. And again, just sort of heading in a different direction from the rest of the state. So part of the reason why this is so important, and I'm going to just pause here for a moment and just say, while the creative economy is really the focus of this project, a huge part of the economic impact of the creative economy is in the extent to which it drives visitors to the region. So we can see, that the number of jobs supported has dropped a little bit in the last few years, while the total amount of wages supported has not. So, again, stability, but are we sort of losing some market share there? Obviously this continues to be an important driver of what's going on overall in the Mid-Coast economy. But, for reasons discussed previously and, that we'll continue to discuss, there's a little bit of softness here. In doing a review of the hotel market, one of the things that we found is that there is a declining inventory of economy and mid-scale rooms. So there are just fewer and fewer of those places all the time. At the higher end, sort of the upscale and luxury side of the market, occupancy is declining, but they're able to offset that through price increases. So you've got fewer people spending the same amount of money. And if you're the hotelier, that might be fine. But if you're somebody downstream who's relying on a volume of visitors to come to your region, that's a little bit less fun, right? One potential problem too for the region is, were somebody to consider, let's say a site were identified for a full service hotel that could serve the region and, perhaps have some sort of conference center or something like that. There's a very, very limited labor pool to operate something of that nature, and also very, very limited business travel to support it year round. So, typically we see a relatively steep drop off compared to regions that have more business travel in the off months. And that's been true for the last few years here in the Mid-Coast. So how do people find out about it, right? One part of the way that people find out about the Mid-Coast is through the information that the Maine Office of Tourism makes available and is put up on Visit Maine. And we can see that, people, if you look down at the Greater Portland and Maine beaches lines, you can see that the percentage of people who are using Visit Maine as part of planning their trips to those parts of the state is going up. But with respect to the Mid-Coast and Islands, it's going down. We're not really sure why yet. So, certainly that's been a part of the dialogue we've had with the Maine Office of Tourism about whether or not there have been any changes to the ways that they're marketing some of these regions. And, they've said that there isn't, however, we've got this data, which is certainly indicates that Visit Maine is being used less for people to plan their trips to this region, while Visit Maine is being used more by people who are traveling to Greater Portland and to Southern Maine. Similarly, people during their visits here really not using Visit Maine to help them, help provide them with information about what it is that there is to do while they're here. And again, you can see if we look down at the bottom two lines there, that is, we sort of have the opposite situation with Greater Portland with Maine's beaches. So Visit Maine is just one part of what Maine does overall to help advertise, both the state of Maine and the individual regions within the state. The other part of what happens is that they have grantees in a number of different regions around the state who do regional marketing efforts. Maine's midcoast.com is, and referred to as Maine's Mid-Coast and Islands website, is used less than any other, with the Maine Highlands is right there with us. But you can see that, some of these regions are doing significantly more. The regional websites are being used much more frequently by the visitors to those regions. So visitportland.com, 25% of people are using visitportland.com to plan their trips, whereas 1% of people to the Mid-Coast and Islands region are using Maine's midcoast.com to plan their trips. What we believe a big part of that is that Visit Portland and the Maine beaches both have social media campaigns that are pretty robust, that are driving people to those websites. Visitportland.com has access to some additional funding because they're a tourism development district. So, some couple dozen hotels there in Portland have agreed to an additional room surcharge of 1.5% that goes to promote the Portland region. Interestingly, that is a surcharge that only applies to hotels within Portland, as far as I can tell, though they are using some of those resources to do some social media for other communities that fall within their larger geography. So, for example, it sounds to me as though they're using some of that money to pay for promotions of things that are happening in Westbrook. Yeah.
Maybe difficult to figure in, but the Penobscot Bay Chamber of Commerce has folded in the last 2 years, and they were a major promoter of the region. I wonder if that's had some impact.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats we've identified here as part of this project, that's something that's come up a fair bit, is the weaknesses overall of the chambers creates a real problem for us, both in terms of landing places for information and staffing for that, but also just in terms of like regional leadership. Who is it that's going to lead the charge on something like a change to the region's marketing plan? So I'm going to just sort of go through some of these relatively quickly. We did a focus group a couple of weeks ago with some folks from the chambers, from downtown associations, from MOT, and we talked through what some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. Nobody's really surprised to see access to the outdoors being a huge part of what sells people in this region. chambers feel that the strength of the organizers and the chambers is a huge strength of the region. I'm not really sure that that's necessarily something that the rest of the broad community across the Mid-Coast would agree with. Some other things that we've identified through the process of our data analysis and the individual interviews that we've done. Look, museums and lighthouses are going to continue to draw people to this region when they're on their way from, Portland to Bar Harbor in particular, right? The southern Mid-Coast is really has a couple of very strong anchors, the Bath Brunswick area and the, Rockland, Camden, Belfast region. We've got some great places like Mohegan Island, just really, really unique locations. However, very unique locations that are limited in terms of the capacity that they've got to serve large numbers of visitors. One thing that has come up as well is that our festivals and fairs are sort of a big thing. There are a lot of those in the Mid-Coast region, whether they're, music fairs or sort of cultural fairs. All right, when it comes to weaknesses, one area is that the visitors based on MOT's data, the visitors to the Mid-Coast are older than the visitors to other regions of the state. We've got some pretty siloed institutions, lack of connective institutions. Our performing arts, which is part of what attracts people to the region, is really geared towards older visitors. So, on one hand, that's great for attracting older visitors. On the other hand, to the extent that what we're trying to do is make sure that future generations of people grow up having fond memories of spending time in Maine in the summer, they may be less inclined to come visit Maine if their parents aren't into, musical theater or something like that. Too many places to go for information was another one there. So again, some of the weaknesses, lower cost accommodations haven't aged well, very little business travel, difficult to sort of maintain and support year-round operations of, mid-scale accommodations. The the geography of this region, something obviously we can't change, but it does make it difficult for people to hit a lot of locations in one day when they're traveling through the Mid-Coast. And so, again, often what we get is the half-day stop in between an origin and a destination. Another one of the weaknesses is that a lack of engagement by the chambers, as the chambers have sort of struggled, has then resulted in perhaps less dialogue than is necessary to support a robust marketing effort for the region, because those are essentially the leaders who serve on the board for the Maine, Mid-Coast and Islands marketing website. Here were some of the opportunities that we identified in our discussion with the chambers and MOT and some of the downtown folks. And we're gonna, with some of these specific ones, we're gonna get into them, over time over the next couple of months. For example, the Maine Arts Communities Grant, I think, is something we definitely want to understand. Certainly, one of the things that Kate and Charlotte had discussed with the Down East and Acadia regional travel tourism marketing organization is how they're using AI and an understanding of AI to understand what information AI is pushing people towards on the internet and what it's not doing to, in terms of connecting people with information that they need. And again, some of the other ones that we identified through our data review and through the stakeholder interviews, we want to work with local communities to help them plan and obtain funding to implement arts related projects. We want to, do some enhanced and more targeted marketing to increase awareness of the unique cultural assets of the Mid-Coast. We want to make sure that we're leveraging the festivals and fairs. We want to use the arts to market the arts, to grow the arts in this region. And it presents sort of a large opportunity in terms of youth engagement. So that's something else for us to consider. With respect to some of the threats, again, people going straight to Bar Harbor and skipping the Mid-Coast is something that people worry a lot about. Obviously, Portland is our gate. It's our jet port and it's our gateway. And a lot of people are just driving all the way through. People's tastes change. We're losing some amenities. I heard you guys were discussing this earlier, but the loss of the birthing center, in Lincoln County, which is potentially at risk of closure, is just sort of another thing that's happening that may end up hollowing out a certain portion of our demographic, overall demographics of the region. We don't have the funding to connect people connect with folks via social media. And so in particular, that is a constraint when reaching out to young people about the travel opportunities and the stuff that there is to do here. And obviously the high cost of housing, which is something, we're talking about all the time here in the Mid Coast. Some other threats that we identified is that, look, it's hard as an authentic experience place or a place that's selling authentic experiences to compete with all the stuff that people can do on their phones. And that's just going to continue to be a problem as there's more and more that people can do on their phones, whether they're enjoying it or not. Interest in history is changing, certainly. And this is something I do a fair bit of work with historical museums in other parts of the Northeast. Certainly there is a little bit of a cliff in terms of the interest level in history generally, and history of our communities and historical sites overall. And the same is true with art forms. So classical musics are less popular than it used to be. Musical theater less popular than it used to be. So ultimately, as the baby boomers sort of age out of the stage where they're attending concerts and things of that nature, that may end up having an impact. Interestingly, like another area where it has an impact is that it used to be that a lot of the arts and culture related activities in the region sort of went later into the evening than they do now. And increasingly places, for example, if you're a performance venue, you maybe used to have an opening act and a headliner, and you maybe used to start at 7 and people would stop at 11, and maybe you were serving drinks all night. Increasingly, what we're finding is that, in talking to folks who have venues, is that they're they've cut out the opening act. They're just doing one. It starts earlier and nobody's really drinking. And if you're running a nonprofit art center or something like that, that may be a significant part of what your revenue is to operate the nonprofit art center, is the margins you're able to achieve on food and beverage. And obviously another one is price sensitive customers. We've got sort of a lot of people who are feeling less financially secure than they used to be. And then a small number of people who, have enough money to take vacations all the time. Affordability concerns. And one thing I think that came up in one of my interviews recently is this sort of idea that there's growing resentment of tourism in some of the communities in Maine. And that certainly would be an interesting thing to figure out whether or not we're going to have sort of like the type of backlash against visitors that people in other places that are sort of inundated with visitors, such as, Barcelona or Venice or, places like that are experiencing. And again, if families stop coming, will the next generation feel sort of the same nostalgia about visiting Maine? So with that, I'll just sort of talk to you for a couple minutes about what it is that we're going to be doing for the next few months, and then be done with this portion of the presentation. We're doing ongoing work to identify what those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. We're mapping the region's arts and culture assets. Charlotte's put together some great stuff on that isn't quite ready for prime time yet, but really, really wonderful opportunity for us to sort of look at it geographically across the region. We're trying to identify important voices in the creative economy. If there's somebody in your community that you think can really articulate some of their challenges and some of the things that they're facing, please let me know, because we'd certainly love to connect with them. We're trying to put together, as I said, a toolkit of best practices and identify funding sources that'll help you guys as Mid-Coast communities implement your priorities. We'll be working on that for the next couple of months, leading up to September presentation and get stakeholder gathering, where we're going to be able to get sort of a lot of feedback, hopefully from folks in the arts and culture in this region, and put the sort of early work together on a cultural plan for the Mid-Coast region. So that's, now you're sort of up to speed on what it is that we're working on. I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got about the project and what we're learning so far, and take any suggestions in terms of direction going forward. Yeah, Alex.
I was curious why you use, really focus so much on tourism, you know?
Well, so part of it is that it's such a big leverage point. Arts and culture is a big part of why people come here. And the visitor economy supports a lot more jobs than the creative economy just generally. And so, you know, to the extent that the revenue, you know, the visitors to the region are going to be the ones who are spending money at creative businesses, we need to understand the trends with respect to, you know, are people visiting? Are they spending money? You know, we also need to sort of understand it's very difficult to talk about how you would market this region without talking about one of the things that's its most obvious strength, right? Which is the arts and culture in the region. So we do think that the two things are tied together. The project is very much sort of focused just on the creative economy. That's the part that we're really focused on. But to understand what's going on in it and to think about how to leverage it as an opportunity, we really need to think about both of them together. Yeah.
I have a question about sort of thinking about the strengths and weaknesses. Presumably, and maybe this has come up with discussions with the tourism, but you know, I'm imagining there are some strengths and weaknesses that are highlighted that are sort of historic. You know, it has been the case for decades that Portland and Bar Harbor are the sort of, when people come, they're the fear of missing a meal. So it's
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's any sort of thinking around what the historic strengths and weaknesses are, and then what the emergent ones are, like the ones that have been really can be tied more recently as you know, post-pandemic. Is there any utility in sort of flagging what has been true or has shifted versus what is sort of a new dynamic?
That's a great question, and something like, you know, definitely, I hadn't really thought about it in exactly those terms, but it is something certainly that we're like thinking about going through the project, right? So part of the reason why I want to highlight the MOT data about how it is that people are getting information when they come here is so that, you know, because our strengths and weaknesses haven't changed that much overall. There are some things that have changed, right? So, you know, we're trying to pinpoint what those are. The one that I identified, you know, in particular earlier is we've got sort of a declining number of mid-scale hotels and mid-scale hotel rooms in the region. You know, when we've tried to engage with MOT on the question of why is it that your marketing really seems to be landing better with those southern Maine gateway markets than it does in other parts of the state, including the Mid-Coast, we haven't really gotten very clear answers about why that is, beyond just the fact that, again, Maine's beaches and Greater Portland are spending more money from other non-MOT sources on tourism, on social media marketing, you know, to drive people to those websites. You know, certainly, I think, you know, again, some of the weaknesses and threats that we identified around the age of the people who visit here and what relation that might have to sort of like the future vibrance of some of the things that we really value as a region. You know, just to use an example from only a few miles away, Maine State Music Theater continues to do a great job, right? And they're programming and stuff all summer. Are people going to be coming to Mid-Coast Maine to go to musical theater in 10 years at the same rate that they are right now? Not sure, right? So, you know, those will be interesting conversations to figure out whether or not we can identify, you know, do something more to identify what those threats are. But, you know, primarily, I think demographics, affordability, you know, and just being able to get people's attention and the attention economy are probably some of the big ones. Yeah.
Have you guys ever looked at the size of the communities in the sense of how it relates? I mean, everything we're talking about are some of our bigger communities in the state. You know, and as far as just being able to make some of those financial and physical decisions on their own versus a lot of us who are smaller communities that are all tied together where we couldn't even think about taking something on
Right.
ourselves where I managed three of the biggest beaches in Maine and Scarborough for a long time and we were flush with cash all the time. We did whatever we wanted. Didn't matter.
Yeah.
Then you start now back in the mid coast and it's like everything's a little harder, a little slower. There's more people to check. You got committees for everything.
Oh, yeah.
You can't flush anything now as fast as you would like to, and the opportunity is gone. So I didn't know if that community translated to anything on the economy side of things, because we're not that connected, even though we share borders. It's just, we talk because we're neighbors, but it's not like we're gonna, hey, let's build a hotel together and.
Right. Well, I think it's a great point. You know, fundamentally, like, you know, the 69 communities in the MCOG region, most of them don't have economic developers at all. You know, some have economic developers. Many of the economic developers who are employed at a local level in the state of Maine and across the Mid-Coast region are people who are new to the job. Maybe were trained as planners, perhaps, right? You know, so obviously, if you're a planner, everything looks like a plan. So, you know, then we do sort of like a lot of engagement, right? We talk to everybody. Very difficult to get stuff done. So one of the challenges here is going to be, how can we sort of help the communities who don't have economic development staff be in a better position to implement the things that they've already identified as their priorities? And then how can we as a region sort of come together enough to show that we're together so that we can compete for funding that'll allow us to do some regional things? And I think some of that is really going to be about notching small wins early on, so that we can begin to build some momentum, and maybe some leadership capacity. Some of you may remember, and I actually, for some reason right now, the name of it is escaping me, but there was actually like a Rockland-based sort of creative economy of Maine organization that existed for a while. And, you know, that was at a time when, you know, coming out of the sort of early to mid aughts, there was a creative economy plan developed by the state that some folks at the Muskie Center helped work, Charlie Colgan and others helped work on. And, you know, as funding and momentum for that dried out, you know, 10, 15 years after it was implemented, became no longer an organization like that. But there probably does need to be ultimately some sort of regional locus of activity here, right? Where we identify somebody who's sort of the face of this, and can move it forward, push it forward, convene people, and has funding in order to do that. But I think to get there, it's going to require, you know, some pretty arduous work for the next few years. Yeah.
I wonder if the work you're doing and the presentation you just gave us, indicating the decline that's occurred in the Mid-Coast. I don't think that's it's probably widely known by some of the retailers. I was a retailer for 40 years in the Mid-Coast, and probably I would have noticed. But I don't think it's widely known. And I think there's sort of there's a transition occurring within the retail community. There's an older generation represented by folks like myself who were retailers back in the early 70s, mid 70s, that are getting out of the business and they're tired. And there are some new retailers coming in that are so new that they don't have the time to put in to lead that charge. And I think that's what happened to the Pet Bay Chamber. That was the third largest chamber in the state, and they sort of vanished. And I think it might be incumbent on someone, not sure who, your information should be presented at Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, places that you can talk to the community leaders that already convene and see if you can't, I guess, maybe frighten them into realizing that there's a lost opportunity there, that they need to step forward and work on how to reconvene some organization that gives the momentum that the region needs.
I think it's a great point. You know, fundamentally, a lot of what we, you know, just in the brief sort of review of the economic data that I was showing you is essentially the K-shaped economy, right? It's like we've got a small number of people who can spend a lot of money on some things on their trips. But a lot of other people who used to be able to do things who are no longer able to do them at all. And if you're only looking at the money, let's say from the perspective of the Maine Office of Tourism, and you're looking at, you know, metrics like dollars spent on accommodations, and your stakeholders are hoteliers, you know, you might not be alarmed by this story. Because it's not really rising to that level, right? You're still sort of seeing enough overnight visitors, enough day visitors, enough dollars spent in communities across the state of Maine to sort of feel like things are going okay. And it may very well be that, you know, the data from the last few years represents the early stages of a trend that we want to become aware of and begin to identify, you know, potential solutions or mitigations for going forward, right? And so the time to have those discussions is now. And I think part of the question then is going to be, where do the resources come from to have those conversations? Who are the people who are going to lead those conversations? Because there certainly are a broad set of people that we could engage in those conversations who are affected by it. Again, going back to what I was saying to Alex, I mean, I think part of the reason for showing the visitor economy is that it's so big, right? And so to the extent that there is stuff that's happening adjacent to the visitor economy that's being affected by the visitor economy, we gotta understand that. Yeah, Sally.
I like the idea of somehow capturing the campground data and funneling that into this whole picture, because the mid-coast, I mean, you probably know this, but when people come here, they hit multiple places along the mid-coast. And so I'm not as worried about like, if the hotel stays, I mean, I am worried about the hotel stays, but also they might be camping along the way. Whereas you go to Bar Harbor, you might go for a week, or you go to Portland, you stay several days. People hit different things along the way. And then we just need to, I think we need to capitalize and look at that and see why, and we have enough for them to do along the way. And then how do we get that social media out there? Well, this week you've got this, and we also try to plan them, just like we did. So we're having a 250th event on the mall here in Brunswick on Saturday, and we steer clear of Bath Heritage Days because we don't want to compete. So if we can really get out like this sort of trail, you know, you're starting and you're going, you know, up the mid coast and really market it that way. Like, I think there's timing to certain things. You know, when you're talking about the creative economy, what are we talking about? Because you're maybe not just doing like the arts, but you might be doing, like, think about winter. What are you doing along the way? Winter, are you skiing? Are you doing whatever? Just to tie, like, what is, like, I really don't know if it's just like music, art, and.
Well, one of the things that, you know, when we distribute the report, the draft report that we've been working on, it has all of that data appendices, you know, what the industries are that we've defined. We've broken them down both by certain industry and by county, so people can look at it on a county by county level, as well as on an industry by industry level. You can agree or disagree with how we're grouping them, you know, but ultimately you've got to draw a line somewhere, right? I mean, I think with respect to the, you know, campground thing, again, what I'll just say is I can't speak for the MOT data, so. Yeah. My guess is they may be included, right? That they're surveying people who come to the state of Maine about how much they're spending on where they're staying, but I can't speak for that because that's ultimately it's an MOT data question. But you know, I think it's probably.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Wilderness camping is a separate category, and then the RV and campground is another separate category, and their open stays there.
Good to know, that's it.
Yeah, I'm one of the Bowdoin College interns with Topsom, and I was wondering if on this project you had connected with the college at all about the opportunity to spread the word about some of these creative opportunities to visitors, especially families who might be coming in with more income than just say a college student themselves, because I just think it just remains like a continual source of visitors to the Mid-Coast area, and there are a lot of people who would be interested in the arts or history or any of those tourist attractions.
I think that's a great idea, and not something that had occurred to me previously. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, again, like there is an opportunity for the people who are coming to a place like Bowdoin, you know, however 2,500 people, students a year or whatever the number is, you know, many of whom are spending not their own money, right? OPM, we like to call it, and economic development, other people's money. You know, so like, that would be a fantastic way for this region to capture some more of that would be to try to get people who are here in the region for 4 years while they're attending a place like Bowdoin to become more familiar with the other places that are near Bowdoin, so that when they want to come back later for alumni weekend and, things like that, they've got a good idea of where they want to head. In the back there.
Yeah, I get, that you're measuring creative economy, tourism policy. But it would be interesting, maybe at a later date, to measure it for the people who came here to enjoy the lifestyle of all that. And, because I figure, well, my annual expenditure in the coast is like a lot.
Yeah.
But, because I think it's a huge part of the quality of life here. And I think you could probably measure that, and I think it would give you insights too on like, if you're, whatever that amount of money is, it could be, maybe it's a lot, and you might consider then, getting with the people who live here more to be like marketing for your, next generation of, activities, so that you've engaged the people who are here in their future generation.
Well, I think it's a great point. And ultimately, a big part of why we're doing this project, right, is not about like necessarily about driving tourism, driving visitors, but to understand, people who come here to visit the Mid-Coast region might make a decision about wanting to stay here on the basis of the stuff that they're doing. Certainly, there are a lot of people who move to the Mid-Coast because of, in part, the array of amenities that exist in the region, including like large anchor institutions in arts and culture, including, the small stuff that's happening on community by community. So certainly anything that we want to do going forward, it has to be sort of about not destroying that, but also about leveraging it to the extent that communities are comfortable leveraging it to drive more visitors here. But it also needs to be about making sure that the people who moved here because of those quality of life considerations that you're talking about are able to enjoy the quality of life that they imagined when they came to the summer, right? So, one of the things that we've done, which has proven to be a little bit challenging, is, when we're trying to put together our list of the, at this point, hundreds, I think, of businesses that we've identified in the area and that we're mapping, is to create a separate category for ones that appear to have uneven hours or, aren't open the same number of hours all year. Because, again, some places do a great job of that. Just to use an example, the Maritime Museum in Bath, they're wonderful in terms of just like staying open all year, engaging people all year. They've got school kids coming in. They're open, I think, 364 days a year or something of that nature, right? Which is just fantastic, but that's not the case for every cultural institution in the Mid-Coast region. So, those are things to think about as well. Yeah. Alexis.
I guess my last question of the day, but I'm wondering, and this is maybe an MDRE question, but a lot of crazy things were happening in 2020, 2023, 2024, of which was like people were on lockdown and then we were released and then people had a lot more flexibility because lots of us got to work from home, and then employers called many employers called back. So I'm wondering if it wouldn't be possible to add a 2019 baseline so that we understand if what we're seeing 2022, 23, 24 is actually a drop, or if it's just getting back to what it was pre-pandemic. So I feel like it's hard to know because there are so many like big forces at play that knowing what was happening pre-pandemic in terms of the baseline.
So great question. Obviously, like one of the problems is you've got to have data sets that are sort of consistent longitudinally. And MOT has changed contractors in terms of like who they're using to collect their data. So we don't have like longitudinal data that's sort of apples to apples comparison going way back that's been made available to us by MOT. So that, in terms of like trying to measure, say, visitor days or, room nights beyond 3 years ago, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And with respect to one of those, there was actually a methodological change in terms of how they counted it, which is part of the reason why we don't look back that far. So you're right, there could be some, as I said, there could be some noise signal in some of that data. But I think by and large, if what you sort of think about and understand is 2024 was probably a soft year. With, in comparison to 2022 and 2023, 2025 data, I think is just now available. I'll take a look at that, when we get an opportunity to. But what we want to do in part is to build a data set going forward so that we can understand this better, from here on out. But I also think that, when you think about the fact that, let's just take accommodations as an example, right? That particular category, there's been almost no change in the amount of money that's spent in this region for the last few years. Well, think about the amount of money you're spending on everything else. It's going up, right? Tomato prices went up 33% in April. So, there are a lot of things that we're spending a lot more money on. If we're spending the same amount of money on accommodations, or if the same amount of money is being spent on accommodations in the Maine Coast region, then that indicates that by and large, we're kind of like falling behind. We're losing market share, right? It's becoming a smaller part of our economy. Or we're losing market share to other regions in the state. So, there are some things that I think that the data can tell us, despite the fact that the 2020 to 2023 years are so strange. Yeah.
I wonder if part of the reason for the moderate accommodations going down is the affordable housing prices. Is 40 years of driving up and down Route 1. You see the family motor port or whatever that used to be moderate priced accommodation. Now it's long-term or monthly rentals or something,
right,
for people that can't find another place to live.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of those places, what they found is that there was no longer market for that sort of, mid-scale or economy accommodations. And they shifted to other uses, and, temporary housing is a big part of that. Apartment dwellings as well. So, yeah. Yeah, Alex.
So the smaller inns and bed and breakfasts are definitely going down, and the economics have changed. So it's a good point. Just three quick things. First, MOT uses St. Germain's to do their data analysis. And there's a lot to be desired with their data for sure.
Yep.
There's a lack of differentiation between regions. So Maine, Mid-Coast, and the islands, everything from Brunswick up to Belfast, and it includes like Islesboro, Vinyl Haven, etc. Not all the islands, just the ones here. And they recently changed their governance, so it's no longer chambers that are on that board. It's any kind of tourism stakeholder that fits the bill. So they're looking for board members, and Maine, Mid-Coast, and Islands is the regional tourism entity. The state's made up of several different regions. This is our region. They get roughly $300,000 a year from the state to implement marketing strategies. So they're a great entity to really leverage, and they are looking for more board members. So if there are folks in your area that want to be part of that board, Lincoln County has pretty good representation, including the members of the chambers, the directors, and also Coastal Botanical Gardens. But it's a great opportunity if you know of folks that would be a good fit for that board. They also recently hired Blaze Partners to do they're now their contracted marketing entity. So they've moved away from their previous marketing entity, Blaze Partners, which is based out of Portland. Now they're marketing entity that they're using that funding for to promote the region. And they're conducting listening sessions. I think they might have finished. So far, I think they've only done two, one in Damascata and one in Booth Bay, but it's a great opportunity for the rest of the region to have voices heard about tourism. So I encourage you all to be engaged in Maine, Mid-Coast, and the islands as much as you can. And then finally, 250th, you mentioned it, in Brunswick, it's coming up. So in Lincoln County, we'll pull together all our historic societies and historical museums. And we meet regularly, and out of that, it's culminated the summer map and guide of what's going on in Lincoln County. So it's GIS based. So there's a map online, story map, that has information about all the historical societies and museums in Lincoln County, and all of the addresses of these places. And then a calendar of all of the events that are happening all summer. It was supposed to be for the 250th, but most of them aren't really having events. So we just sort of expanded it. So I'm gonna leave a pile of those over there in case any of you are curious.
If I could turn the tables just real quick and ask you a question, so. In terms of where people here might go to look for information about how they can get more engaged with Maine's mid-coast and islands. Is there a place that lives on the web? Is there a way that they've been trying to disseminate that message to folks sort of beyond, the Lincoln County Planning Commission and other folks who?
Yeah, and I just know because I pulled together all the directors of chambers, in Lincoln County monthly to meet, and they're engaged in that board. So I'd say, you can reach out to me. I'm at Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. I can tell you who to engage on your local level. Probably the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, I think, the chambers in Lincoln County, Corey King are probably the most active. Katie Hay at the Coast Botanical Gardens is really active. But if you want to make it easy, reach out to me. I'll leave my card on the table.
Okay. Great. Right on time.
Excellent. Perfect. Thanks, Jacob.
All right, thank you guys. I didn't picture me. 40 years.
All right, folks, and we're back. We are very lucky to have two representatives of the Maine Coast Heritage Trust, Land Trust with us for our keynote this afternoon, and I'm going to introduce them. First, we have Kate Stuckey, who joined the Maine Coast Heritage Trust as president and CEO in 2022. Raised in Blue Hill, she has worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors up and down the East Coast and overseas, but is glad to be back home. Kate brings over 25 years of experience in organizational management, marketing, communications, nonprofit leadership, and project management. She has held leadership positions in a number of organizations, including the Maine National Capital Park and Planning Commission, where she built and oversaw the Public Affairs and Community Partnership Division for Montgomery Parks. At Pathfinder International, where she led a variety of global initiatives, and at Revels, a national cultural arts nonprofit, where she blended her love of music and the arts with her passion and cultural diversity and understanding. And we're also joined by Angela Twitchell, who joined Maine Coast Heritage Trust as their Director of Land Trust Programming in 2023, and now serves as the Senior Director of Community and Government Relations. She brings over 25 years of experience working in land conservation, and most recently worked for 15 years as the Executive Director of the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust. Prior to that, Angela worked as the Government and Community Relations Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy's Maine chapter, and managed two successful campaigns totaling $85 million to pass public land bonds in Maine. So please join me in. Hi. Can everyone hear me okay?
So thank you all for inviting us here today. These are some of our favorite conversations to have because collaborations between land trusts and the communities we serve are critical to conservation work in Maine. So as Meg mentioned, I grew up in Blue Hill. I spent most of my childhood outdoors exploring the woods and the beaches, swimming in frigid water because I was 12 and apparently impervious to cold. I can't do it anymore as late in the season as I did, but I got dirty. I got wet, I got lost. I learned which plants and berries I should eat and which I should avoid, sometimes the hard way. And I once got stuck in an outhouse for about 20 minutes because there was a moose right outside the door who wouldn't budge. I learned to appreciate and respect the natural world at a very, very young age, as many of us do when we experience Maine, either as residents or as visitors. But then my professional career began. And I started spending most of my time inside, in office buildings, on Zoom calls, looking out the window at the outdoors. We're really lucky here in Maine. And I have a little trivia contest. I should have brought prizes. I should have brought prizes. Do we have prizes? Oh, we have stickers. Okay, who likes stickers? Okay, does anyone know how many miles of coastline Maine has?
3,000?
Okay, hold that number. How about how many lakes and ponds?
8,000.
No fair using the Googleerator. 8,000, is that the guess?
6,000.
6,000. Okay, how about the percentage of our state that's forested?
95.
95? 93, I feel like an auctioneer. 93. Okay. In short, it's a lot. Right, it's 90% of our state that's forested, so it is the most forested state in the US. We are still surrounded by nature here. And I don't know,
Someone-
maybe not.
Someone might not. Sorry.
That's okay.
If there's someone on Zoom who's unmuted, can you just mute yourself at least during the presentation? And then we can hear you later and all your staticky questions.
The guessing is over.
It oddly sounds like you're hard. Spread your.
My hard drive, that's a good. Right, I think we're fine, but we'll see.
Okay, thanks, Max. I'm gonna ask you all to close your eyes for me. Imagine that you're in your favorite place in nature. It could be at the beach, could be in a deer stand in the woods, walking on a trail, fishing in a river. I want you to feel the sun, the wind on your face. Hear the birds, the sound of the water, the wind in the trees, the crunch of leaves, or the springiness of the pine needles under your feet. Now imagine the next time you go there, there's a no trespassing sign. You can open your eyes. When I was a kid, we just went places. We bashed through the woods, we explored, didn't matter who owned what. We took care of where we were. And there were very few places that weren't accessible. That's not as true anymore. A lot of the places that I loved as a kid are marked as private now. And since our founding in 1970, MCHT has worked hard to conserve as many of those special places as possible and keep them open to the public. We've conserved over 200,000 acres since then, and most of those, about 150,000 of those acres, we've transferred to local land trusts, to municipalities, to the state, to the national park system, to ensure that they're managed well and available to the public in perpetuity. Now, you may not be able to read, or can you read the legend?
Okay.
Okay, I'd have to have my glasses on. So all of the dots that you see on this map, these represent places that MCHT has helped to conserve. And all the blue dots were places that were conserved in partnership with others. Because conservation is not the work of one organization, it's shared work. And it's really only achieved through partnership and collaboration, which is in our DNA. MCHT founded the Land Trust Network. And we continue to partner and support the 80+ local land trusts that serve communities across the state. Our hope is to ensure that our lands and waters, Maine's precious natural resources, are healthy and resilient for generations to come. We invest in conservation because we believe that the health of our communities is intrinsically tied to the health of our lands and our waters. And conservation is not static. Like the ecosystems that we work to protect, it's constantly evolving, and we're learning together what's working, where we need to adapt, and how we can better meet the needs of the communities that we serve. And we'll always be focused on the future vision for conservation in Maine, but over the past couple of decades, our guiding question has really changed. And that's largely because of the relationships that we've formed with municipalities and communities like the ones you represent. The question that we ask now is, what's the vision for the state of Maine? And what role can conservation play in helping achieve those goals? And conservation efforts have evolved accordingly. Land trusts all over the state are working with municipalities and communities to directly address challenges like housing, food insecurity, access to land and water for commercial and recreational purposes, working waterfront preservation, and community resilience to storms. This slide gives you a sense of the breadth of our work. Where land and water is involved, where working lands and waters are priorities, land trusts can play valuable partnership roles. And one of the most important roles that land trusts play is as stewards of the over 3 million acres in the state that we take care of, 93% of which are on tax rolls as open space property. And as nonprofits, land trusts are responsible for raising the dollars, the money that is needed to care for these lands, the majority of Maine's protected lands, and ensuring that millions of acres remain open for hunting, for forestry, that thousands of acres of farmland remain farmland, that thousands of miles of trails are available for hiking, walking, mountain biking, snowmobiling, ATV use. We safeguard access points across the state for commercial and recreational use. And we work to protect and preserve with partners working waterfront sites along the entire coast. Right now, we're actively working with the state and a few other partners to find ways to keep this important conservation work going in ways that support sustainable traditional industries, accommodate population growth, and provide space for development and supporting infrastructure. How can we ensure that our state continues to grow, that our communities continue to thrive while safeguarding the natural resources that sustain us? That's the big question we collectively need to answer. How can cultural and economic uses of the land become a broader part of conservation strategy, or vice versa? These are the meaty questions that we're digging into with a wide range of partners in Western Hancock and Washington counties right now, in the hopes that what we learn there can be applied and adapted in other regions across the state. In the meantime, MCHT will continue to prioritize both ecological and community projects, and we seek a 60-40 balance in either direction. Water access sites, affordable housing collaborations, parking lots, cemetery land, trails, shorefront parks, these all fall under the heading of community projects, and all are the kinds of projects that have been brought to land trusts by municipalities as community priorities. In the past 6 years, MCHT has transferred ownership of over 145 acres directly to municipalities, and we've supported municipal ownership of another 210 acres through partnership contributions. And of course, there are going to be community projects that don't align with our strategic goals, and there will be community priorities that we are not able to support, but we are willing and able partners. And we encourage you to invite land trusts in your area to the table to see what might be possible together. And now I'm going to invite Angela up to share more detailed information about the land trusts in your area and to share some specific examples of municipal collaboration.
Thank you, Kate. I'm really glad to be here with you today. My hometown is Topsom. I'm glad to say Topsom. I grew up in Turner, Maine, but for the last 20, well, since 1999, I've lived in Topsom. And one of the first ways that I got to know my new community was to get to know the town, join town committees, get to know my neighbors, helping to solve issues in the town of Topsom. And I was lucky enough to begin working at the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust in 2008. And our most important partnerships were the municipalities in the service area in which we worked. You all are well aware that municipalities, town managers, town staff are overworked, you're underfunded, and the people of your towns have really high expectations in lots of different areas. And in the service areas where I worked and where many local land trusts are, we got to do more together in partnership with the towns. So local land trust staff, board members, volunteers, and members often join town committees. They help do planning efforts, help support town staff, help raise funds for some of the priorities that towns set for themselves in their comprehensive plans and other planning efforts. So that is some of the work that I'm hoping to talk with you about today, maybe inspire some ideas for you to work with your local land trusts if you're not already. So I wanted to start by, and there are some hard copy maps back on the table, as well as this map of all the land trusts in the state on the easel over here. But when I looked at the Mid-Coast Council of Government service area, there's lots of local land trusts where you can work, and you can see them listed here. I'm not sure if you can read them all, but land trusts are organized in many different ways. As Kate said, there are over 80 local land trusts in Maine. Some of them are statewide, some are coastwide, like Maine Coast Heritage Trust. And some are one town land trusts. There are some really effective land trusts that are just cover one town and they work really deeply in their local communities. And as you can see from this map, there are other local land trusts that cover pretty large regions, and particularly in the mid-coast. So I wanted to highlight the fact that the Maine Land Trust Network is a network of land trusts. It's a program of Maine Coast Heritage Trust. And if you haven't explored mltn.org, it's a great place to go. You can search for what land trusts cover which towns and directly link to land trusts in that way and find out lots of information about the work of land trusts. Some of the numbers that Kate mentioned from the impact of land trust are collected in a report that I have on the back table called Land Trust Work for Maine, and you can feel free to take those if you're interested. You can also find them on the MLTN website. And I wanted to focus most of my talk on some examples of how land trusts work with municipalities to support the priorities of the towns. Maine Coast Heritage Trust works throughout the state and up and down the coast. And some recent examples, a very recent example is Maine Coast Heritage Trust has partnered with the town of Cushing on a project that is slated to close on Monday to secure the first public water access site in Cushing. And Cushing has a coastline of more than 5 miles and they don't have a public water access site. So we were really excited to be able to work with the town to make this possible. Fingers crossed that closes on Monday. As many of you know, in your community, access to the coast for clamming and other uses as development increases is often at risk. A couple of recent examples of Maine Coast Heritage Trust working with local communities to secure clammer access was Wyman Bay in Phippsburg and Woodward Point in Brunswick. And there are other examples of this because this is often raised up as a priority for communities. And Maine Coast Heritage Trust also is engaged with local agriculture, supporting farmers and local agriculture systems, as well as housing, right? Housing is a land use that we all know is we don't have enough of it here in Maine. And many land trusts, including Maine Coast Heritage Trust, work with municipalities, housing trust, and others to assess properties. We may want to conserve a part of a property, but a part of it might be better served as housing. So we partner often with towns and housing trusts to make those projects happen. Recently in Rockport, where we have Erickson Fields, we conserved a piece of property, and 1 acre of that we donated to Mid-Coast Regional Housing Trust for them to develop as housing. So those are some examples, recent examples of how Maine Coast Heritage Trust has worked with local municipalities. And then I've got some, I reached out to some of the local land trusts in your service area to just get some examples from them. So I wanted to share those. And I'm not sure which towns are represented in the room, but some of you may be involved with these land trusts. And later we are going to have a small group discussion opportunity. And if you have examples to share with others of how you've worked with your local land trust, that would be great too. So Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust is a local land trust that serves a number of mid-coast communities. In the town of Damariscotta, they are working closely with the town to explore properties for possible to support possible housing needs. And they actually assessed all of their properties, and they have a property that is unrestricted that they're working with the town to see if some housing could be developed on that. Connecting trails, as you know, is a really important thing, especially connecting schools to trails. And you'll see on here, there's a couple examples of the land trust working with the town to connect trails with sidewalks and crosswalks. And the nice part of land trusts and municipal collaborations is sometimes land trusts have access to funding and grants or donations that municipalities can't access, and sometimes towns have access to funds that land trusts can't access. So it's just a good example of how we can get more done together. Coastal Rivers does some trail maintenance on behalf of the town and school districts, and this is pretty common with local land trusts. Many small municipalities do not have the staff to be able to maintain trails, and often land trusts have staff specifically for that purpose, so they enter into agreements and help support trail maintenance, trail building and management. I thought this was interesting. They also monitor fresh and saltwater swim beaches for Bristol and Damariscotta. Those were some examples from Coastal Rivers. And Mid-Coast Conservancy is another local land trust that covers a number of towns. Actually, several years ago, a number of smaller local land trusts merged together to become Mid-Coast Conservancy. And they shared some examples of ways that they work with the town of Waldoboro on trail maintenance, as we saw at Coastal Rivers. Also, conserving land at Quarry Hill Farm and helping to connect trails across town land and land trust land. And worked with the town to support management of the town forest by some biocontrol efforts around hemlock woolly adelgid. And then this is my local land trust and land trust that I'm most familiar with. And so there's a number of examples. I'm really familiar with these. If you have questions about them or how they worked, I am most familiar with these. A really recent example is McCoy Woods in Brunswick, where the town purchased a larger property. Is it 300 acres approximately? I think so.
Yeah, it's about 300.
Yeah. And then in partnership with the land trust, and the land trust was able to do fundraising and purchase an easement on 240 of those acres. So the highest value conservation areas that directly feed out into McCoy Bay. And they plan to do some trails and public access there as well. And then the town owns the property, and for the additional acreage, they're assessing priorities for the town. It could be used for things like housing or other priority needs for the community. Head of Tide Park in Topsom is my favorite example of a partnership between a town and a land trust. It took about 12 years of really close work between the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust, the town selectmen, the planning board, the conservation commission, and pieced together 5 parcels of land with all sorts of different funding sources. They had to remove an old dilapidated apartment building in partnership with the fire department. And there's about a 15-foot waterfall there. If you haven't been there while you're in the area, I highly recommend. And now you go up there and it's just it's really well used. Tons of wildlife there, picnic shelters, vault toilets, and trails that connect up and down the Cat Dance River corridor. And so I like that example because it demonstrates a sustained relationship between the local land trust and the municipality, where they're working together to implement priority goals of the people of Topsom in comprehensive plans over many decades. The conservation of a corridor around the Cat Dance River was raised up as a really high priority. And over many years, we have now conserved more than 1,000 acres in more than a dozen properties up and down the river. So it's a good example of how partnership over time can make a big difference in natural resources in a community. Also in Brunswick, Crystal Spring Farm was a 300+ acre farm, often seen as a gateway into Brunswick. It was conserved by the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust, and they lease it to a farmer, so it remains in active agriculture. But it also has trails, a community garden, a farmer's market, which is really popular in the summer, which benefits the larger agriculture community, and is really seen as a community hub for the town of Brunswick. And the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust noted for me when I was asking for examples that they are now in talks with the town about possible management of a senior garden that the town has maintained, but they need some support keeping that going. And land trusts also work closely with school departments, which is really important in communities, connecting kids to nature, getting them outside, making sure the next generation is getting out in nature and learning about the ways that natural resources are important to our communities. So, yeah, so those are the examples that I have. Kate and I wanted to leave some time for questions about anything that Kate mentioned or I mentioned, and then we have a little conversation exercise for you to break up into small groups and talk about, but happy to answer questions before we dive into that. You have.
Lunch. Right? Lunch is settled in. That's the problem. It's always problem.
Worse than lunch. Yeah, well, there will be an opportunity to talk after the small group.
Maybe that'll get people moving again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, great. Thank you.
have you seen more interest or kind of heard concerns from people around the state on invasive insects? I know you mentioned the hemlock, the holy hemlock, but I know here in the Maine Coast, brown-tailed moths are a big issue, and we also have the winter moths. And, you know, I'm just on a personal level, I live in Edgecombe, so I go to Schmidt Preserve all the time, it was mentioned there, and then I'm just so concerned about all of the trees that are maybe going to die in the next couple of years. And I was curious if you guys have heard more about that issue or had any collaboration or sort of your involved with that.
Yes. Short answer, yes. And it's not just invasive insects, invasive plants, invasives management in general has become a bigger and bigger part of not only land trust budget in trying to manage these things, but also municipalities in the state of Maine. And, you know, there aren't always great answers to how to manage these things. But there is a lot of coordination. I think the state of Maine does a good job coordinating with land trusts and municipalities when they have solutions that work. And sometimes there's funding available tied with these tactics, but it has become a bigger and bigger part of what land trusts are challenged with, because when we conserve a property, we are then tasked with managing it forever. And invasives are becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So we don't have all the answers, but it is something we're really paying attention to.
And we're trying to focus more also on education of private landowners whose lands we hold easements on. And sharing more information with them about ways that they can help manage those kinds of issues on their lands too. But like Angela said, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of great answers. You know, we're working with Acadia National Park and Scudic Institute to try and control some of this and just see where it goes. I mean, MDI, Mount Desert Island is an island, but it has a huge infestation problem. And we're trying to control it as much as we can, but it is hard. It's like,
I guess my question is, because we're a regional organization and your election, you know, municipalities that make the region, you know, there aren't municipal boundaries that animals go on. So just can you talk a little bit about your efforts, maybe on a more regional scale, and how municipalities might be able to collaborate on, you know, sort of a vision or some strategic planning that's a little bit larger than potentially, you know, what they can do within their own town?
Yes, this is a great question, Meg. We're really lucky at Maine Coast Heritage Trust because we have planning staff. So we have staff members who every focus of their day is on planning, just like this. And we work closely with local land trusts as well as municipalities in the state and others to support each other in statewide and regional planning efforts. In particular, at the Maine Land Trust Network, we have regional meetings of land trusts, and many of those have been supported by our staff or the Maine Natural Areas Program in developing regional conservation plans or watershed-based conservation plans. And I have really seen in my years working in conservation that there's a much bigger trend towards this, because as you said, rivers don't pay attention to municipal boundaries. So there's a lot more information available. The Maine Natural Areas Program is a great resource for this sort of thing. Probably most of you are familiar with that, but they have sort of recently rehired their staff person who supports municipalities in getting the information they need to do some natural resource planning. Forgetting his name, but they were a really great partner in this. And I think always reaching out to your local land trust is a good way to work on this too, because they're probably talking to the abutting land trusts in your area.
And you know, a number of the regional initiatives that we've undertaken have come to us through collaborations of municipalities. So one of the largest projects that we undertook that didn't really seem like it was a land trust project to start with was the restoration of the Bagadoos up on the Blue Hill Peninsula. And the towns of Brooksville and Sedgwick and Penobscot came together because they wanted the alewives to come back. And the river was not in great shape. And they came to us, and I think the answer of our planner was, well, that might be possible. And so it took many years and many millions of dollars and a lot of partners, including the state, but we got the work done. The alewives are back. So I would say that there's, you know, as Angela said, we tend to work on the land trust side. And so where there are opportunities to bring land trusts together, we do that as much as we can. We have the regional meetings. We also have an annual conservation conference that we host in Augusta. We had almost 500 people attend our annual conservation conference this year. And there was a lot of municipal representation, and we would encourage you to come and present, like share some of the collaborations that you have entered into with land trusts, and just attend and meet other people and see what's possible. But if there are ways through your own planning coordination that you can coordinate with neighboring towns and then come to a land trust, we can start working on the regional collaboration on our side to support the regional collaboration on your side. One of the other examples that comes to mind, again, on the Blue Hill Peninsula, because that's where I live, but there are 7 towns on the Blue Hill Peninsula, and I think 4 of them got together and hired a climate resilience person to look at sea level rise and the impact on their bridges and their roads and their town and municipal buildings and residential impact, and help support the work that needs to be done, the preventative work that needs to be done to address the storm damage. And, you know, January, February, 2-3 years ago, it was significant. It opened up a lot of eyes. And so there was a lot of additional focus on, okay, what can we do collaboratively to help prepare? And that was one of the examples that came up. That was towns doing that, but we worked directly with that person to help move that work forward.
Yeah, I know I have specific experience with you guys saying this at one time, but how do you go about the process? You know, almost every town has the answer. We love the forests and rivers here, but we hate the property taxes are rising. How do you go about the process of acquiring new land or expanding current land holdings in a town, working with that town as far as, okay, this is going off the tax rules? Is there a way to offset that?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. Yeah, I mean, as we said, we look at our relationship with towns as a partnership, and we at Maine Coast Heritage Trust and local land trusts, when we're going to be doing a conservation project that we are going to own and manage, we make sure that we talk early to the towns, municipalities about that project, what our plans are, what the management for the property will look like, what the public benefits are. And it depends on the town and the land trust. You know, for instance, in Topsom and Brunswick, we worked closely together for a long time. We had really, the conservation plan that the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust put in place was based on natural resource and open space plans for the towns. And we really felt like we were in partnership in implementing the goals of those plans. So it wasn't a surprise when we went to the town and we said, oh, we've been able to conserve this property. And in those towns, if you would apply for an exemption most of the time because it was a town priority, the land trust was taking on the cost of stewarding it, but the town saw the benefits outweigh taxes. Sometimes it depends on the property too, like Crystal Spring Farm that I mentioned remains in active agriculture leased to a farmer. So that property remains in agricultural current use tax program, paying taxes like any farmer. So there's not an overall answer. It's sort of place specific, town specific, land trust specific, and it's a conversation pretty much every time.
I would just go back to the data point. 93% of the property that's managed by land trusts remains on the tax rolls, and it's an open space.
Some's in open space, some is easement properties that the landowners still pay.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's on the tax
Yeah.
rolls. And the one example that I think is an interesting example, and I'm sorry that I don't remember the town. It was a town in Washington County, and there was a big parcel that we were interested in acquiring, but the town was really nervous about its tax base. And the part of the property that was of most interest to us was the wetlands. It was the marsh part of it. But there was a good amount of good developable land along the road. So we purchased it and we split it, and we took the more ecologically valuable land, and then we put the other land up for private sale. So I don't remember how many house lots it became, but it became residential house lots. And so there are ways that we can work with towns to achieve both purposes.
the answer is gonna talk early.
Well, and it's so variable. I mean, they're from town to town, what towns need, where the priorities are, and what they're looking for is different. So it's part of the reason why we encourage the growth of a local land trust network, because if you're working with people who live in the community, there's a good marriage of priority there.
And talk early, it's yes.
Yes.
And I can't remember if it was you, Kate, or Angela, somewhere has touched upon housing in the presentation. And I was wondering if you could talk a little more. So in Bath, we've always had a great working relationship with Kelp, and being able to collaborate on projects that aren't just conservation focused. And we just had one recently where, an area where we're going to develop 120 units of housing. Part of what helped that build community support was part of the contract zoning was conserving trail access in partnership with Kelp to be able to work through that. So can you talk about some of the other areas, and there are examples in the state, or how this can be a productive relationship to accomplish both things, to accomplish like housing development and conservation of land? Because I think this is where more areas and communities get pushback on housing development or other types of development. It's reducing open space, but I think there can be, or we've had good examples in Bath of like a partnership to make both work.
Yeah, and there are good examples all over the state. That example I mentioned in Brunswick at McCoy Woods is one. There are lots of examples of land trusts working with towns and housing authorities to do planning ahead of time and share. The land trust knows the areas that are high value for conservation, and the housing organizations know the places where are high value to put housing, and they usually don't overlap. Sometimes there are parcels of land that it does make sense to split it off and serve part and housing happen on another part. But often it's just the talk early conversation. Usually the parcels that are high value conservation are not always the ones that are good for housing. And land trusts, there are many examples of land trusts around Maine. Health is a good one, of land trusts speaking up in community for the development, because it's a really important community value and it doesn't impact negatively conservation or natural resource values, and vice versa. Developers will speak in support of conservation projects because they're both understand they're important to the community, and both they're not mutually exclusive.
And I would say currently, somewhere between 8 and 12 different housing collaboration projects are going on or have recently completed. We've done a few on Deer Isle. We've done some on Mount Desert Island. There's one active in your backyard in Rockport at the Erickson Fields property that Angela referenced earlier. But they are coming up frequently. And one of the questions that we have now, because it's localized, where are there statewide barriers to this work that we could help address? Where is there statewide learning? How can we help to convene conversations around these types of collaborations so that we can learn from each other, because there are different models for doing this. And there's a lot that we could learn collectively from each other.
I'll just address the one in Rockport, because I'm on the planning board there and I've been working with this. Erickson Field is a property that Maine Coast Heritage Trust owns and takes care of, along with Alderman Farm. It's a working farm also in Rockport, famous for its Belted Galloway cows. Erickson Field, which I think produced about a couple tens of thousands of pounds of vegetables that were given away every year to local food banks, also had across Route 90 an old 3-story farmhouse with a dilapidated barn and a couple of acres of nothingness. Land not terribly worth conservation value, but the Maine Coast Heritage Trust has worked with a new local housing trust in Rockport, the Maine Coast Regional Housing Trust, which is converting the old farmhouse into a 3-bedroom apartment, a 3-bedroom home for rent, which will be occupied in August, open to go. And then a couple of other buildings that will be put on, apartment buildings that will be put on that property for a few more rentals. And these will be rentals for what's called the missing middle. That is 80% to 120% of the area of median income. So it's not available for government subsidies, but still people that can barely afford to buy a house. So that the land trust, the Maine Coast Heritage Land Trust and the Regional Housing Trust are working together very nicely in Rockport to put more housing on the tax rolls, and while maintaining a working agricultural farm that supplies our local food banks. It's all working very nicely.
And great to have you here.
And the land that's made available, I mean, if we can donate it, we'll donate it. Sometimes it's a reduced sale and that works too, but we really do try and make it possible.
Sally, did you have some?
Oh, I was just gonna add, regarding point one, is that it's really a balance, because our community was concerned about, of course, conserving most of that property, but also we don't have large tracts of land like that available in Brunswick, 300 acres. Losing that when we knew we had an affordable housing issue like everyone else. There was really this delicate balance of like, okay, we need to conserve some parts of it for housing development, and our community has every expectation that we're coming back and making good on that. Also, there was some funding that was brought to the table, which also really made the difference for our town council. So there was that funding opportunity that came through the Brunswick Thompson Land Trust, bringing these, a significant amount of money that was meaningful and conserving part for housing. So I think that's also important to know that sometimes resources do come to bear that kind of make a difference. And so having those partnerships is really important. But yeah.
This might not be too different from the sort of housing land trust conversation, but I'm, as someone who's very much on the periphery of conversations around the blue economy and working waterfront. I was just wondering if there's any lessons learned or patterns you guys observe that because it seems like the question of access is key to both efforts. And I'm wondering what, if any, lessons you guys learn and share with the blue economy folks, and then vice versa, sort of how that back and forth happens.
Yeah.
We can talk about
start. Yeah. There are, as many of you may know, there are several sort of coalitions of groups talking about working waterfront and how we can support our fishermen, aquaculture, all of that. And Maine Coast Heritage Trust is working with Gulf of Maine Research Institute, the Maine Lobstermen's Association, the Maine Aquaculture Association, the Island Institute, Maine Farmland Trust. Because even though they're land-based, a lot of the things that work for farmland conservation are transferable to working waterfront conservation. So they're in the conversation. And we're all, there's been a grant that is funding our work to sort of come together and talk about, okay, what are some options? What are all of these organizations who have some stake in supporting working waterfront? What can we each bring to the table? Is there a new organization or something new that has to happen to support Maine's working waterfronts? Are there new funding sources? How can we go about supporting our fishermen in Maine? And by the end of the year, we're going to have a report. And it's been a really great collaboration because it's pulling together just what you're referencing. What are the things that we've learned from conservation on the land that we can think about to support working waterfront? A lot of land trusts do some form of this, like lots of land trusts, as I mentioned in my examples, are working with marine resource officers in towns or claimers association to figure out, okay, where is the traditional access that isn't conserved, that's at risk, and trying to conserve those. That's pretty traditional conservation. But when you get to the bigger working waterfront docks with more infrastructure, we're still kind of figuring out how to make that work. And this group is, I think, going to make some real headway in that over the coming year. So.
And the only other thing I would add is so much of the work we do is connected indirectly. Then we do a lot of work around marsh and river restoration and care, just to try and help alleviate the temperature in the Gulf of Maine. So that we're directly involved in the conversation around working waterfronts. It also helps inform some of the work that we're doing around marshes and rivers to just do whatever we can from a conservation standpoint to help manage the health of the Gulf. I don't know what time it is or
It is 10:02.
how long we have. We did, I don't know if we, do you want to go to the next
Well, I
slide?
feel like the questions have been so robust, we may not need
We may
this,
not
but-
need this, but we really wanted to learn from you. Too, just about what needs you see from a community perspective that we could take back to our organization and the Land Trust Network. So maybe we don't do breakout groups, but I wonder if, you know, these were our questions, was just, what would you consider the top 3 priorities for your communities right now? Is this an okay thing, Meg, to sort of turn back to you and ask questions?
I know that, so I'm trying to work with 5 communities in Knox County to connect trails. There's the 2 land trusts in that region that I'm trying to coordinate with, because I guess I don't know if that's a priority for me.
For most land trusts, connecting trails is a priority, yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out the funding piece.
Mhm.
And would it be better to go through the land trust to figure out funding? Or have everybody come to the table? Because it's like.
That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
If everyone comes to the table, then you can sort of brainstorm. Everyone will bring what they know about potential funding sources, what they might have in the work, you know, with the Maine Trail bond that recently passed. There may be a good opportunity for some regional collaboration around doing that work. And if you need help connecting with your local land trust, like part of my job is running the Maine Land Trust Network. And so you can always feel free to reach out to me and I can help introduce you or connect you in that way. And not just you, anybody. Yeah.
If I put my Warren Town Planner hat on, one of the biggest priorities is like working waterfront protection, water-based, but we have a ton of, and it's common with all the connecting towns of that second ring of Knox County. And everywhere in the mid-coast, once you get off the coast, we have a ton of lakes and ponds and rivers that, if you go back 2 generations, everyone remembers growing up. It was easy to, 10 different access points to North Pond and one, and now they're not. And so that's been a very consistent for recreational purposes, for fishing, birding, what have you. People are really passionate about being able to access those bodies of water instead of just see it come from the road.
For most land trusts who have lakes and ponds in their service area, that's going to be a priority for them too. And conveniently, there are ongoing funding sources for water access through the state. So it usually is a great partnership, you know, if it's a small town and you don't have experienced grant writers partnering with the land trust, they can help write the grants and maybe raise some match. I don't know what land trust covers, Warren. George's River, yeah, if you.
We're partnering on supporting a carry and boat launch on one of their waterfront parcels.
That's great. I mean, just like when I was talking about the clamor access on the coast, you know, often land trust will talk to whoever in the town government. You know, we talked to the marine resource officer and they had a map of all of the clamor access points and which ones were conserved and which ones weren't. And with ponds, usually I would imagine town staff knows, okay, this lake doesn't have any quality boat access and this has 4, so maybe we could work on this one. So those sort of projects are really great to get started if you haven't worked with your local land trust because they're very tangible and easier to move forward than some.
Are there resources to help determine how you want to use, say, a trail? Like, seems like you can get pretty broad consensus, let's have a new trail. And then all of a sudden, I want to take my horse there. I want to take my only bikes and pedestrians. what about e-bikes that are as fast as
And dogs.
ATVs, you know, or ATVs themselves?
Or wheelchair.
Yeah, are there, and maybe you do some things in winter, but not other, are there
Yeah.
examples of how people kind of navigate through all the different types of uses to figure out what
I
works?
mean, for land trusts and usually it would be land trusts and towns if you're partnering on a trail. Usually you do a management plan. You're gonna conserve a property, you reach out to all the different stakeholders, you do natural resource assessments. Like a lot of times the land is gonna tell you what uses fit there, you know, if it's highly erodible soils, you probably don't want motorized vehicles or mountain bikes, but if it's hard soils and you want to allow as many uses as you can. So a lot of it depends on the land and the community, what the uses people want to have. Are there historic uses? Are there existing snowmobile trails? So there's no easy answer, but a lot of conversation, bringing people in, hearing what the needs are, and then making management decisions. Usually land trusts will make like a 1 or 2 year management plan when they're putting in a new trail or managing a new preserve. Kind of live with it, see how it works with the community, what things are coming up as problems. And then before they do a longer term management plan and then make adjustments. So, and then you manage it as you go, right? You're always, I mean, one of the most challenging things, you probably all know this, if you manage trails, you know, dogs, I laugh about it, but it's really hard. Some people love dogs, some people don't love dogs. People don't pick up after their dogs. So it's not easy and it's ongoing.
No magic hands.
There is no magic answer. Being out on the trails helps, you know, having a robust volunteer program so that there are people out there, so people feel accountable to follow the rules is kind of a magic answer.
So I've got experience in Richmond, a small rural community. One of the first conversations I had with COG was that they informed me that we have internally conflicting ordinances with regards to land use and housing and subdivisions, and they conflict with the state. And the conflict between large rural farms that are no longer operating and the pressure that the town has to find more housing opportunities, land for that housing. Yeah. It seems like one of those questions, that middle bullet might be, do you guys get involved in that kind of nastiness or?
Yeah, I tend to look at it as an opportunity.
Absolutely. Challenge is an opportunity, but I
Yeah.
haven't pushed that
3:30 on Friday before you get to look at it.
yeah, I haven't opened that can of worms yet.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's good for us to know about, and there are instances where, you know, there's like a Venn diagram overlap with some of those issues where we will chime in.
Okay.
And we will, you know, we have an advocacy person who spends time in Augusta.
I have no idea if we have any active land trusts in
Yeah.
town.
Richmond is one of those areas that sort of could be in a bunch of different land trust areas, but isn't directly in any one. Kennebec Estuary Land Trust, Brunswick Topsom Land Trust.
I understand
Kennebec Land
Richmond has been
Trust.
really good at hiding.
Yes.
So
Yeah. But also,
staying under everyone's radar.
yeah,
So I'm just curious, there's several, like thousands, 4,000 or 5,000 acre.
I'm really
farms.
aware of this.
So
Maine Farmland Trust too could be a great
Okay.
resource. One thing that I would say when I've partnered a lot with Maine Farmland Trust, and an answer could be to do the soils mapping, right? Where there are prime agricultural soils, that's a community asset, right? So you probably don't want to put houses there, but
no,
probably,
winery there.
yeah, probably all of that 1,000 acres.
Sure.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna.
Yes, that
throw
sounds
yeast in
great.
whatever they do.
Right.
But probably all of the 1,000 acres isn't really prime ag soils, and it would make sense that that could be zoned, you know.
You all have some resources that could help us.
We
with
do,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and definitely Maine Farmland Trust would be a resource for you, I think.
thank you.
Well. That was a great
Do you want to-
conversation.
We have a closing slide that has Angela's contact info.
Yeah.
Oh, and mine. Thank you, Linda. And truly, reach out to either one of us and we will do what we can to steer you to whomever would be a good conversation partner, whether it's us or a local land trust.
Thank you all. Thank you for all the work you do. I know your
Yeah.
job's hard.
Thank you very much for coming.
It's just a quick. In-house things for those that want to go to the tech place. Go down that street. Maybe we'll take your cars there and leave you from there. And you'll see the tech place sign on the side of the building. Can't remember whether it's left or right. End of the street. But for those of you that are going, they're expecting in a few minutes. Oh. Please venture. And for you.
Yeah, for the rest of you, thank you very much for making the time today to be a part of this, and certainly appreciate it. And safe travels home.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Um,
Thank you.